That's not actually a workbench. It's really just a table saw with a piece of particle board on it. So I'm due for a little improvement, and there it is. Actually, I think we can make the improvement a little bit bigger. This video is all about the workbench. I'm going to discuss how I got away with only having a contractor saw like this in my garage for the last 10 years, and I'll show you how to build one of these, or two of them, so that they can be used in a modular fashion as an outfeed table for this. I will also discuss adaptations of this design like this, and I'll give you an argument why I think this is such a good frame. This is very simple. It only requires 6 2x4s, and you can definitely build it. If you'd just like to see the build video, now is the time to jump ahead to see how to make one of these. But for now, I want to discuss how I managed to make adaptations to this small space to get away with just using a roll-away contractor saw. One of the most important features of a workbench is stability. It's not bad, but it's not going to come out of the box like this. You have to make some changes. For one, this outfeed roller picks up some of the slack. Once I move the plywood out of the way, I can go ahead and use the table saw. If I need to cut sheet goods though, I'll have to move this all the way off, which is kind of a pain. This is the old one. I just turned it upside down and got a second life out of it. But I have to take the plywood completely away in order to use this extension wing. That's my zero clearance plates. I'll show you that in a minute. Now it's ready to cut sheet goods. So if I want to swap out the zero clearance plate, I pop it up here, and in this little cubby, I've made a box that stores them all. I have one for every major angle. Around the side, extra blades, and a few different John Heiss push sticks. That's a convenient location for them, and I also number them by thickness. What I mean, notice 1, 3, 2. Some of them have had their tongues cut from really, really thin material. Uncut is number 3. It helps to label the up and down rotation just because sometimes you don't want to think about that. Okay, this feature is probably the most important thing with having a contractor saw as your main shop saw. As it is, the wheels are no longer functional. They've been lifted off of the ground just a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch. And the tubing rests in this cove molding. But watch what happens when I pick the saw up. It just simply comes right off of its rockers. If you don't use those, your saw won't be anywhere near as stable. And wait, I still have some cleverness up my sleeve, but it's under the hood. Look up. That is my dust collection system. Not really. It's my table saw sled. So if you were ever wondering what those pipes sticking out of it are, they fit right into that track. Nice and easy. In summary, if you make the little changes that I mentioned here, then I can recommend with a straight base using this saw. 10 years experience using it this way, and so these adaptations have evolved over that time, but I had a couple years experience with it before that. Here's a minor correction that needs to be made to. This is a minor correction that needs to be made to the saw's design. You have to prop this part of the frame up or else it starts to sag here. and then it rubs. So all things considered, this has been lovely for me, for the most part. But I'm ready for some change. I need a couple of workbenches now. Okay, I'm building 2 of these. Now before we even get started, I should mention that this is built specifically to my purpose. If you want, you can use this frame and build it way more heavy duty. I'm just using a piece of particle board on the top that will be 3 inches away from the frame all the way around. And the reason for that is this. 3 inches is how deep a clamp can reach. Now, should you choose, you can make a butcher block top for this, which would be wonderful and insanely strong, or you could just double up the plywood if you so choose. If you want to see really, really hardcore workbenches that you could set a transmission on, go check out either Jay's Custom Creations or Make Build Modify. Both of those guys have great videos and great channels. I'll link to those videos at the end of this video. But if you're sticking with this, I'm doing it to be medium duty. I want it to be lightweight so that I can move it around, and there's 2 of them so that I can rearrange them whenever I want. Now I might make a more burly one in the future, but for now I just need 2 quick and easy ones. Both of my workbenches are going to be dimensionally the same as this. That's 30 by 48. So for materials, pretend that this is a 4x8 sheet of plywood. We can get 2 top surfaces out of this and still have enough extra to do another one. As for 2x4s, you'll have to get 6 2x4s for each, so I'm going to get 12 altogether. And there'll be a cut list for you later on in this video. Oh, and also I'm going to use 3/8 plywood to cover this bottom part. If you have to buy all the materials brand new, expect to spend about $85. That's for 2 of them though. Okay, let's go get materials. That was easy. Now if I only had a couple of workbenches to break my materials down on. Formaldehyde vapors, huh? Maybe that's what's wrong with me. Okay, it's already 48 inches wide, so now I just cut it to 30. This side is the piece that I'm keeping, and this side is the rest of the sheet. The object of the game is to cut as close as I can to my knife scratch without going over, and then later I'll just belt sand the piece until it's perfectly on that line. Now, of course, you can also use a straight edge if you want. This is just a different way to do it. Look at that, a perfect fit. I've grown quite accustomed to working on this size table. It's very convenient because you can reach all the way across it and it's still large enough that it can hold up some pretty big stuff. 2 of them will be awesome. The dimensions are 30 by 48. And it's worth mentioning that that's a close approximation to the golden ratios, so it's aesthetically pleasing as well. Okay, I want to give you a good look at it up close so that I can show you what I'm doing. I left just a little bit of the material remaining, but the knife cut reveals perfectly how much I have to sand down. This method of cutting down material is a great procedure to have in your tool belt because it's really easy to do, it's pretty quick, and it can give you a finish that rivals a factory edge. This is a mix of 5 parts mineral spirits to 1 part stain. Now because it's mineral spirits, I have to be careful not to damage my paint, so I'm just going to dab. I'm not using conditioner, and this is very thirsty wood, so I'm trying to blend it out as best as I can. But I'm not too much concerned with detail because it's going to dry out a little bit, for one, and for two, we have to keep this in perspective. This is a workbench. Next up, some polyurethane. There's really only one option for a finish on a workbench, and that's polyurethane. So let's jump right in. So I guess I want to work hard and give it about 3 or 4 coats before I start scratching it up with my utility knife. The particle board is very thirsty, so it'll suck it right in, but don't let it pull up on the surface. There are really only 2 finishes in woodworking. There are polyurethanes, and everything that's not as good as polyurethane finishes. It takes a little bit of finesse, and that's beyond the scope of this video, teaching anybody how to use polyurethane, but when done correctly, it is far and away the best finish in my opinion. Get the edges too. Everywhere that the polyurethane penetrates is going to turn into a hard plastic-like substance that turns this junky particle board into an awesome surface. That does it for coat 1 of perhaps 3, and in between coats, don't bother washing the brush, just do this. Over the 3 or 4 days that I give it 3 or 4 coats, I may change the mineral spirits that's in here once, maybe twice. Just be sure that your bristles are nice and straight. This is just a simple clamp stop, and it will make the process much easier. Don't put it on tight, nice and loose, and it will keep the cut-off 2x4 from falling away. It's typical for lumber to come with an ugly end, so because my first piece is 42 inches, I'll rough cut it first to around 42.5, and then I'll cut it a second time to get it on the money at 42. I used the cut list, so getting them ready is a snap. There's 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. Now I have to sort them into their 3 piles for the main frame, the legs, and the lower frame. Main frame, legs, lower frame. Let's build the legs first. That's the hard part. Take note that the legs consist of 4 short and 4 longer pieces, and that's because one of them goes all the way to the top and one of them stops under the upper frame. Now the longer of the 2, I want to cut back a little bit to reduce its footprint. To do that, I'm going to mark 1 3/4 inches from one side and 1 3/4 inches up and connect them by 45 degrees. And again, we're only doing this on the long parts. Okay, they'll be assembled like this. Screws or nails, it doesn't matter. If you're unlucky enough to know how to use one of these, that will work fine. Starting from the bottom, make sure both pieces are flush. This is the longer of the 2, and this little block just helps me to center one on the other. It doesn't have to be perfect, but try to get it real close. And I want my first fastener to be about 1.5 inches from the end. Any closer than that risks splitting it. Next, come to the top side, and again, at least 1.5 inches away. I want to add 2 remaining fasteners, one about here and one about here. But take a look at the bench. Because of the positioning of the lower frame, I want to make sure not to put a nail anywhere in here because it will interfere later. The lower frame is from the bottom between 8.5 and 12. So don't put a fastener there. Of course, hand nailing is always an option too. And you might not know this, but you can also just set a nail without a nail set by doing this. We want to get it below the surface, and that way we can just put some filler in and make it disappear.
Next up is the top part, the main frame.
Not much to say about this part because it's easy. We can take 2 of the smaller ones, set them aside, that will be for the middle parts, and of the remaining 4, take the nice faces and put them out because that's the part that you will see. I think it will be easier to install these 2 center parts later. Where they're located is from this board 12 inches X ahead, which will result in 3 cells that are all 12 inches in between. That is not easy. I really take my time with this part. Before I actually fasten the leg to the frame, I sit on the frame and clamp it tight, taking special care to make sure that there aren't any gaps. Any gaps that are here that you screw into place will end up as play and it will give it wiggle room, and later it'll fall apart, especially right here. Why does this gap matter so much? This is the reason that I think this frame design is so strong. Any load that gets put on the frame transfers directly onto the legs. If you were to make an easier design for a bench, say just a ring that just screws or nails to the outside of your legs, then any weight that's put onto the frame itself is only being held in place by the fasteners. If they were to shear off, then the entire thing goes crashing down. In this case, because the load is so perfectly transferred down to the legs, this thing is as strong as your tabletop is. And if you make this 1.5 inches thick or something, then you could park a truck on it, which I'm not going to do. And back to fastening this together. Imagine that you have X-ray vision, and you can see this screw and this screw going like this. We want to pass another one in between them without hitting, right here. I want 2 more screws for each leg. One somewhere around here and one somewhere around here. In order to get the angle right, you can set one of the screws there as you drill.
And that brings us to the bottom frame.
This one is also easy to construct, but there is a minor difference in its assembly between this and the top part. Notice that the sides get screwed to the front and back in the lower one, unlike the top one where the front and back gets screwed to the sides. I've already marked center, so there's nothing really stopping me from installing this part right now.
Hopefully you will think ahead more than I did here, and you will measure up 12 inches in advance.
What's the significance of making it 12 inches to the top? Because that height fits a common paint can perfectly. Okay, let's see if I can explain this correctly. For each of the legs, I'm going to attach the lower frame with one screw and one nail. From the bottom, the screw will be 10 1/4 up and 3/4 of an inch away from this board. That places it right into the end grain of this part of the lower frame, but it misses both of the existing screws that are already in there. As for the nail, it can be done on the inside, anywhere in here. I'm using a 10-penny nail, so it doesn't reach all the way through. If you're using a 16-penny nail, angle it a little bit. Why the additional nail and not just another screw? Because a nail has a higher shear strength than a screw does. That means it will bend instead of just snapping like a screw will do. Screws suck. Nails bend. This is just an old bar of white soap. If you're having difficulty driving your screws, just put a little bit of this on, and they go in smooth as silk. Of course, we want this all to be in the flattest plane possible, and it seems like this one's just a little bit high. I know you don't want to hear about it because it's boring, but sanding is important, especially right here. If you don't sand these sharp edges when you drag your table across the floor, it will catch and splinter, and these splinters can move all the way up your bench and look really unsightly, and then you'll have to repair them. So get it nice and smooth. Don't skimp on sanding. You don't want splinters.
After a couple of coats of paint, I can put this thing together. I'm using a garage floor paint, and I do this on all of my shop furniture because it covers well and it's cheap and easy to find. I've tried 3 or 4 different brands by now and they all seem to be the same, so don't worry about that.
After a single coat of paint, the wood will have a rough feel to it. This is because moisture in the paint causes some of the fibers that are in the wood to stand up, but it's actually pretty simple to take care of. We just knock them back down with a piece of sandpaper. A light sanding followed by a second coat, and it will be nice and soft to the touch.
Particle board is great to work on, but it's just not very strong. This bench was originally designed to have 2 layers on top, so I might be changing this later. So if I do add a layer of strong plywood underneath later, I'll just screw that directly to the top frame, and then I'll screw the particle board and plywood together from underneath. No clips needed, and no screws will be visible on top.
Considering all of the workbench designs that are out there, why should you choose this one? Well, because it's inexpensive, it's easy, it's unimposing, and it's very strong. It's also easily adapted to different purposes. If you look, the way that there's a T designed to the legs, it gives it an inside corner, and you can use that to add sidewalls, like I did in my lathe cabinet. I have an entire video about this thing somewhere, and it's in a bit of a mess right now, but it has proved very handy. You should also take note of the legs. I didn't use a full 2x4 on them. Why not? Because it's not really necessary. It's already strong enough by just ripping a 2x4 in half and using that for the long part. In comparison, the workbench has an entire 2x4, which makes it more than rugged. Here's another variation of the design. This one also has the skinnier legs, and I made this one a little more weather resistant for use in the greenhouse by giving it some composite decking for a top. It also was painted with a white enamel paint, which has helped it to survive 8 years of harsh conditions, so I'm pleased with it. I don't necessarily recommend building one of these without using a lower frame, because that really helps to strengthen it up, but it just goes to show you that you can play with the design. So, if you're in need of a workbench, try giving this one a shot. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen to you from trying?
I hope this was informative and interesting to you, and I hope that you come back to find out what I'm going to do with these. Stay tuned. Thanks.
The use of computer modeling software has all but eliminated model making like this for prototypes. But doing it this way can be satisfying, and it's not that difficult, and it can save you a lot of money in lost 2x4s. The scale that I used for my little prototype was an 1/8 to inches scale. In other words, every 1/8 of an inch equals an inch in real life. In this case, it's 2.5 inches, which is a total of 20/8. That means that this little guy represents a 20-inch piece relative to this scale. Converting back and forth is easy because 1 divided by 8 is 0.125. That's our magic number. So if we want to convert 2.5 inches to how many inches would that correspond with in real life, we would just multiply it by, you guessed it, 8. 2.5 inches times 8 is 20/8. If you want to go the other direction and you know that you're going to need a 20-inch board, you just multiply 20 by 0.125 and you get your 2.5-inch piece.